Good evening, welcome to Football Geeks podcast. Tonight I'll be chatting with two guys who've collaborated towards a singular goal to put together a book entitled Moments That Could Have Changed Football Forever, investigating those football what-ifs that rankle the committed fan of the beautiful game. Taking us down to the Paradox City tonight are two Peters. We have Peter Thornton, freelance writer and screenwriter, and Peter Prickett, the bearded coach, FA tutor, coach and author. Pete and Peter, hello.
Hi there, Phil.
Good to be on.
Thanks for it. Well, thank you for coming on the show. It's a conversation I've been really looking forward to have because the book, it sounds like everything that a kind of football, someone with an interest in football would like to explore, but you got there first, so you've kind of you've siphoned the fountain before anyone else. So that's fabulous. So we're going to talk at length about your co-written tome, Moments That Could Have Changed Football Forever. But firstly, tell me a bit about yourselves and your respective football projects. Pete, do you want to go first?
I was lucky enough to I live in writing, starting off in advertising, then worked on some big events, and then I sort of drifted into writing events sort of for football. So I wrote everything in the National Football Museum when it opened, and I've written for a host of Premier League clubs. I've written for the Premier League, but lately I've been lucky enough to do a lot of work for my first love, Manchester City. And if you go on social media, I wrote the films when City won the treble. That was the last thing that I've done. And I've just got a very nice project going on that will come out on November the 28th for City, which is an absolute beauty. So I've been very lucky. And in football-wise, I was, bitten very early. I always wanted to be a coach. And then when my sons played, I got involved with junior football club, helped run a junior football league, and then for my sins, I finished up as a director of the Lancashire Football Association. So, sort of a 30-year history in grassroots football.
Oh, fabulous! So you're on the board when everybody turns up at the clubhouse to sort of like sign up at the beginning of the season.
All that, yeah, I've done all that. I did all that for about 20 years. Yeah, it was glory.
An administrational minefield there, man.
It is.
Oh, fantastic, man! I've coached myself, and I've been one of the people who've been at one of those admin meetings, so I know what's going on there. So thanks for that, Pete. Moving on, Peter, tell us a bit about your history, mate. Where does your love of football come from?
Love of football. I probably started getting into football late 80s. But first, I remember watching Italian 90, but I don't remember it particularly well. I have a pretty vivid memories of the 1992 FA Cup final. And from there, football just became a part of my daily essence. I'm in my about 15th year now of coaching. Said in the intro, you mentioned I've tutored with the FA on futsal more than with football, but nonetheless, still FA tutoring. Work with Brentford FC in the community at the moment, and that involves coaching I've coached all the age groups, basically, from the little ones to the oldest. And at the moment, doing a bit of tutoring on the college program. And this book was my fifth football-related book. The other four were much more coach-related slant than this flight of footballing fancy.
Yeah. So what brought you guys together, and how long have you known each other?
It was coaching. To be fair to Twitter, now formerly known as X, as they always say, we met on there through the love of coaching. Pete was so had a big following, and I quickly bumped into him on Twitter. Pete always thinks our first touch base was a disagreement, but then we quickly found we were on the same page on how we wanted to coach, and had a lot of agreement on that, and on the way the game was played. And it's always the same when you meet someone on the same page. You know, if you ever phone them up, we were like, you're on the phone, and all of a sudden you realize you've been on the phone for an hour, and that was it.
Yeah. So I mean, all good friendships start with a disagreement, mate. So I don't, you know, I don't think that's any surprise there. So let's move on to this fantastic book, Moments That Could Have Changed Football Forever. It's a terrific concept, like a masterpiece of conjecture and guesstimation, but also given from a hugely kind of tactical and football aware perspective. So what was your idea behind the book? I'll go with Peter for that one.
Well, yeah, the genesis was from something that I did, and it was your average social media afternoon with people arguing about who's better, Pele. We'll come to Pele later. Messi or Ronaldo. And usually I just ignore them, but on this particular occasion, it was bugging me on that day, and it was along the lines of, as everyone says, can't we just enjoy them both? But then the other part of me was thinking, can you not use this energy that you're pouring into arguing with each other in a more constructive and creative way? Can you think about what if they played together? And that's what I said. And so that's quite a good idea. I could do this as a blog. I put out a request to see if anyone was interested in doing some writing. And my original concept was there were three people's perspectives on how Messi and Ronaldo might have played together. And I wrote that with a couple of people, but we put it out there. It was a nice little piece, and then I get a phone call from Pete, and Pete says, I think we need to write this as a book.
Yeah,
so do it as a blog. Let's do it as a book.
Yeah, I think it was right, mate. So from those small seeds, you've kind of elaborated the idea. And I was saying earlier, like it could become a bit of an anthology. This because it's an endless kind of an endless source of kind of kind of opportunities and different hypotheses. But we've chosen just 3 to discuss this evening. Now you picked out the chapters of the book that we're going to afford deeper scrutiny, and the first one of the great what ifs, a what if that's been hanging around football for decades. So the first one is, what if Brian Clough had been the England manager? Pete, do you want to start us off on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're of a certain age and you grew up watching football in like the 70s, 60s, 70s and 80s, and Brian was the towering figure at the time, and then you had the FA that was sat there in an ivory tower, and for some reason on God's earth, Brian never got the job when he was obviously the most outstanding candidate out there. And there's just some great quotes from Cloughie, isn't there, about what he would have done had he got the job. And I think it was just so fascinating to look at which way it could have gone had he been given the opportunity, and sort of the energy that he would have brought to the job. And then, in the way that it pans out in our story, our sort of our fantasy side of it, could he keep that going? He was always courting controversy. Eventually, would that have been his downfall? Where you look at the time scale that he'd have probably been in the job, he would have sort of run into like the miners' strike, where he was a very big advocate. And, the FA didn't want any of that sort of controversy at the time. So it'd have been very interesting. And we just thought it was an absolute gift. He was one of the ones when we first sat down and said, right, we've got a concept. What are the what ifs we should write about? That was one of the ones that came out like straight away, and it's just a beauty.
Yeah, it's very journalistic in the way that you kind of you put it across, because I mean, he was disliked, and himself, he had a healthy disdain for the FA, and he was very vocal and honest, which is everything that the FA tend to sway away from, isn't it, Peter?
Yeah, and he had a defiant streak, and it's that defiant streak that meant that he did things that you wouldn't necessarily think, oh, that's a natural fit. Like Leeds, he took the Leeds job because he didn't like Leeds. He didn't like Leeds. He thought they'd been bad champions, as the famous quote was, and he could make them better. And I think he would have felt the same about England. He didn't like the FA. He didn't like the way England played, but he could have made them better, and he would have been up for the fight, I think, is what we can say. He would definitely have gone in there ready to scrap tooth and claw to improve it.
Yeah, I think you're right. I seriously, I mean, I suspect that there would have been a better footballing template in place for England, and some of the players that weren't used that possibly should have been. The creative players that he quite liked. He loved John Robertson, didn't he? And he loved players who could kind of go by players and create things. So I think it would have been a better footballing template. So in the chapter, what conclusions do you draw about Cloughie, Pete?
Well, we had great fun on the back of what you just said there, Phil. You know, speculating about which players he would have picked. So, you know, we think about, you know, he had the people like Woodcock and Birtles in there, but, you know, there was a lot of, like you said, there was players that you thought should have been, all the fans would have picked for England who were not getting picked at the time. But I think what you have to remember is that Cloughie was quite pragmatic as well. You know, you think when he signed Trevor Francis, he more or less signed Trevor Francis, broke the transfer record. You know, I think fans today will never realise how big that transfer was. You know, £1 million, you know, the world had gone mad, hadn't it? And then he basically said to Francis, right, you're not that good. You stay over on the right-hand side and play how I want you to play. You know, so there was all that sort of mix. And then we sort of think that he would have had a real immediate impact and probably would have won an early tournament. You think when he could very well have got the job, you know, after the back of Don Revie going, you know, to the Emirates, I think it was one of, you know, to Saudi. Yeah. Don Revie took the shilling, but with the squad at the time immediately after that, you know, was a great opportunity for Cloughie. We think like the European Championship, he could very well have won that one. But then we do think, you know, as time marches on, he would have been in charge of England, we think, you know, in that time scale of like with the hand of God, which would probably have done for him. You imagine that happening and Brian was in charge, you know, he wouldn't have been very diplomatic about what he said after that game. And we think that's probably how he would have exited.
Yeah, I mean, I always felt there's an over reliance on a familiar pool of players. When he left Derby and went to Forest, he brought in 3 mainstays from his, and he was very kind of faithful to players. And do you think that would have necessarily been a good thing, Peter?
It's sort of same criticism that Southgate's getting at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah.
He's loyal to a certain group of players, come what may. But it's not necessarily a bad thing, because that sort of consistency and continuity is maybe one of the things that was lacking with England. I mean, for quite some time, were able to make massive lists of one-cap wonders.
Yeah,
they managers were chopping and changing and picking different people. Graham Taylor he did it for almost his first 2 years, but he was only really following on in the footsteps of what had gone before, because there's some extraordinary players you look at and they only got half a dozen caps.
Yeah.
Then there's some players where you look and you go, he's got a cap. That's a lot of cap. And it was just that sort of inconsistency of selection was there all the way through. It seemed to run through English sport because the cricket team was the same. So it may not have been the worst thing for him to have had a core of, shall we say, favourites.
Yeah.
Who you could guarantee were going to be in the squad every time, just to keep it constant.
Yeah, I think also there was a consistency, like in playing style, that followed Clough throughout his years, wasn't it? It was generally 4-4-2, wasn't it, Pete?
Yeah. I mean, one of our hunches is that he picks Brian Robson when he's very young. You know, we think that dynamism fits lovely with the style of play in that 4-4-2, and he'd have picked Robson a lot earlier than Brian actually got in, and hopefully what a player he would have been under Brian Clough, you know, because I still think personally he's one of the all-time great England midfielders, and I'd have loved to have seen him play under Clough, you know, that would have been fantastic. But yeah, I think that's that loyalty. So I think it's quite interesting, you know, what we've touched on with Southgate, but the whole idea is you get away from just picking someone because he scored 3 against West Brom on a Tuesday night, you know, and trying to form a Club England sort of thing. And I think Clough had that idea that he would pick players not just on form, but because he knew and loved and trusted them, you know. And I think one of the fun elements, if memory serves, Peter, in it, that we had that he wouldn't trust Ray Wilkins.
Too many sideways passes.
Exactly. That was it.
He liked a team with thrust, didn't he? He liked to particularly was in love with John Robertson, who was a fabulous footballer. That was my first World Cup was 1978, and my first kind of real football awakenings were the Nottingham Forest side of, you know, 79-80 winning the European Cup. When then it just seemed like the most normal thing in the world. But prior to that, apropos of nothing, they'd come from nowhere in 3 years to be twice crowned European champion. So you have to think, surely, with Clough at the helm, it would have been better.
Yeah, I mean, Peter's a Liverpool fan, but, you know, I remember that it was seismic when Forest knocked Liverpool out in the first round of the European Cup, because you thought, oh, you know, Clough is going to get his comeuppance here. You know, he's going to come up against the champions, and they'll, you know, Liverpool will sort them out. And when they won, that was like you'd never seen, and it just showed, you know, that he could do it on the big stage. You know, he could.
Yeah. So I'm taking it from that, guys. It's a unanimous. It would have been better if Clough had been the England manager.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and same with you, Peter. You're with that argument too.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think it's from every person who we've spoken to seems to think that, apart from one, which is my dad. So I said it to him, and he went, "It would have been a disaster."
What's the counter argument there, Peter? What's his thoughts?
He just thinks he would have been too stubborn, too obstinate. He would have upset everyone, and it would just have disintegrated into chaos very, very quickly. And it could have gone, it could have gone that way. I guess it could have gone that way, but no one seems to think that it would be. People like Ron Greenwood, as good as they were, I think all of these appointments were a lot more of a steady hand. So Clough would have been a roll of the dice, but it could have come up trumps.
Yeah. I think the other selections were people who the FA felt could do their bidding. They could still remain present in the background and have an element of control, which would have been that wouldn't have happened with Brian. So moving on, guys, we'll go on to the second one, which is also fascinating. The what if in this case is, what if Pele had played in Europe? Now, Peter, do you want to start us off on that one?
Well, Clough was in from the beginning. This one cropped up a little bit later on, and it seemed like when I was growing up, it was nailed on that Pele was the greatest player ever, undisputed. A few shouts for Maradona, but most of the time in this country that was shouted down very quickly because he handballed it. So it was Pele, 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 Pele. But then it seemed like people were almost determined to go, no, he wasn't the greatest ever. Yeah, he scored all of these goals, but certain number of them were in friendlies, and some of them were against his sister's brother's cousin's team, and all that sort of thing. So there seemed to be this urge to downplay his achievements. So I thought, why is that? Why are we trying to downplay it? How can there really be an argument? And I thought, well, is that because now all the great Brazilian players, maybe for the last 30 or 40 years, they've come to Europe and they played in the biggest and best leagues, and the evidence has been right there in front of us, like Maradona did at Napoli. He transformed them. Pele didn't do that. Pele stayed in Brazil. So much of what he did was only done in front of South American eyes, not in front of European eyes, apart from at those World Cups.
Yeah.
So I thought, if he had come to Europe, if he had been a Serie A superstar, would there be any discussion? I don't think there would.
No, and after the 1958 World Cup, Juventus were in for him as well. I mean, it was Ljubisa Brocic who was the manager then, and he wanted him to join. But I mean, they already had like that kind of magical triumvirate of Bonaparte, Sivori, and Charles. Imagine him on top of that. That would have been an incredible kind of coup, wouldn't it?
Oh, unbelievable. That was a discussion, a big discussion, as where we put him. What team did we put him in? And we were really, really tempted with pairing him up with Eusebio at Benfica.
That would have been amazing.
Benfica were the European champions, but we've kind of felt that they might not have had enough financial clout to get him. And at that time, the big players were in Italy. There were Brazilian players there. And you mentioned Juventus were in for him. Inter allegedly were even closer to getting the deal done, and they only pulled out because the fans got wind of it and there were riots. So the deal didn't happen. So that's why ended up going for Inter Milan. And of course, Inter were double European champions in the 60s. So you can't think a team with Pele in it wouldn't have achieved what they achieved, but could they maybe have achieved even more with Pele in the team?
I think if you look at the way that they play the Catenaccio, and then they've got Pele, surely that might have unlocked something a little bit different in them.
Well, interestingly, if you look at their statistics and their goals totals, Inter were regularly in a Catenaccio defensive-minded team. Apparently, were regularly the top scoring team in Serie A.
Yeah.
One of their fullbacks was a double figures goal scorer. So they were, and Herrera always railed at this. He thinks that, or he thought everyone copied him, but they copied him wrong. His style was attacking. It just had a defensive
framework,
solidity and framework to it. Whereas everyone else forgot about the attacking side of it and just went defensive.
Exactly. You don't become as big as Inter were without having some attacking intent, do you? So also, I mean, Pele, it was rumoured that he was that Manchester United wanted him. So Pete, how do you think a Pele featuring in the English First Division of the early to mid 60s may have fared?
Well, I'm very lucky in that my first World Cup was 1966. So I'm one of the few that can actually remember, you know, and I can remember it vividly, us winning it. But I can also remember vividly being so sad about the fact that, you know, Pele got kicked out of the World Cup. And I always think my sort of take on him, you know, playing his football somewhere else, that he might have just been a little bit more streetwise. Had he sort of played in Italy or played in England, like you say, had he played for United in, say, 64, 65, by the time 66 comes around, you've got to think that the tackle laws were completely different in those days. It was grievous bodily harm got you ticking off rather than a card, you know, but perhaps he would have been a little bit more streetwise and perhaps survived, you know, all the kicking, or you know, found a way around it, and then, you know, might have shone more in 66. But what, you know, Pele in the first division, wow.
It would have been incredible. So what was the overall conclusion there, Peter? What were your thoughts on a Pele in a European? I mean, loads of Argentinians came over, and very few Brazilians left in there. Argentinians were everywhere, but Brazilians didn't seem to want to move. I mean, players like Garrincha, he stayed in Brazil mostly. I know he played for a Colombian side for a short period of time. But going back to the original point, how do you think Pele would have fared in Europe? What are your overall thoughts on that?
Well, I don't think he'd have scored 1,000 goals. That's the first thing. But I think he would have fared extremely well, because these friendly games that people used to throw at Pele's goal scoring record and saying they were just friendlies. Well, we've got to think that this is a period where the prestige friendly, to use current international football parlance, but they did these massive tours where they played against the top teams in Europe, and Pele scored goals against Inter, AC Milan, Benfica. So I don't think anyone can really think he wouldn't have scored any goals. Yeah, he absolutely would have scored goals. I think the hindrance to getting to 1,000 is just they don't play as many games. The amount of fixtures would have been far fewer than he would have played in Brazil. So I think you look at the goal scoring records, and there were definitely players who scored over 20 goals in Serie A at the time, and you would have to assume that he would regularly score over 20, maybe got to 30. You know, you're thinking he's the best goal scorer of all time. The best goal scorer of all time is surely going to have the best record. He would have scored hundreds and hundreds of goals for Inter Milan in Serie A and the European Cup. And if he does that, I don't think there's any doubt about his greatness. But he doesn't have the 1,000 goal myth anymore. He just has 3 or 4 European Cups to add to his 2 World Cups.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that. I think the validity would have come from him playing in Europe, wouldn't it? Are you with that as well, Pete?
Yeah, that's the paradox, I think, isn't it? You know, he doesn't get the 1,000 goals, but he does cement his place as probably the greatest player. You know, I think that's what he would have done. And, you know, regardless of, you know, you think of how naive some of those defenders were, it seemed to us in them days when you analyse it, he was still playing at the highest level. And you see what he did to those defenders. And there's no doubt he's one of the greatest players that have, if not the greatest player to ever play the game.
Yeah.
Pele's best World Cup is probably 1970. And he's not the top scorer. He's far from the top scorer at the World Cup. He's a more mature, more creative player who scored important goals. And we don't measure Maradona by the weight of goals that he scored, but we measure him by the impact he had on his teams, the influence he had, winning a World Cup on his own, as everyone says, almost winning a Serie A on his own too. It's not the amount of goals that defines his greatness. And I think because Pele scored that many goals, that people focus on that. But there's more than just those goals. Like Messi's goals output is phenomenal, but what a creative player he is as well.
Yeah,
I think that's what we might have appreciated a bit more with Pele.
yeah.
As well.
I think there's lots of great footballing technicians on the field, but players like Maradona, Messi, Pele, and Zidane, they're players that who had an imagination to think the unthinkable on a football pitch. You know, they would do things that other players wouldn't think of, and that's what earmarks them as truly great, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's a really good point, that, Phil, because I think, you know, one of the things that are always moments that he's always played over and over again is when Pele actually misses. But it's in the 1970 World Cup, isn't it, when he runs past the keeper, and then he, you know, that little move, just that, when you're saying like that little moment of magic that no one else has thought of, or you've never seen it before. You watch that clip and you just hear the gasps.
Yeah.
The crowd gasps. It doesn't cheer. It goes. And then unluckily, he's just, you know, he hits it right across from the other side, and it just drifts wide at the post. But that's the moment.
Yeah,
you know,
his 1970 World Cup highlight reel has got 3 moments that were not goals, but are almost as famous as anything else.
Yeah, the bank save, isn't it?
The moment against Uruguay there.
Yeah.
The Gordon Banks save from the header. Yeah. And then I think it's Czechoslovakia where he tries to score from the halfway line.
Yeah.
And the keeper's generally he thinks it's in, doesn't he? The keeper.
So those 3 highlights are things that didn't happen. That didn't come off. Never mind what actually did come off.
Yeah, that's right.
And another of his highlights is an assist.
Yeah,
for the most
the 4th goal.
The 4th
goal.
So it's that
best
thing
goal of all time.
About the imagination and creativity.
Without doubt, it is the greatest team goal of all time. What a fabulous tournament! The 4 moments that we remember most about Pele, a man who scored over 1,000 goals in his career, he wasn't hitting the back of the net. There's a paradox for you.
Yeah, it is. And let me tell you, that save, I saw it live, you know, or on the telly. That is the best save of all time ever. It's not a debate.
Yeah, I mean, to get such leverage on that header and to push it upwards over the bar. If you're a goalkeeper, and I was for a good many years.
I was.
Oh, was you? All right. Yeah. We're both 6 men together. Fantastic. Yeah. Good lad. Right, fantastic. So we're all if Pele was in Europe, it would have enhanced his reputation. I think we're agreeing on that, aren't we, fellas?
It would have eliminated some of the debate that seemed to have crept in.
Good answer. So we're going to move on to another. This one is one of the most exciting and ambitious chapters, in my opinion. Because I was saying to Pete before we came on, this could roll up into the early hours, but we'll try and keep it down to a potted version. And that is, what if number 3? What if there was no offside rule? So who's going to start on this one? I'll let you boys argue amongst yourself.
Well, go on then. This was, if you have a look at the book, there's lots of like fork in the road moments, and you know, what if the ball had bounced this way, or you know, things like that. But we wanted to look at the impact that certain things could have had on the game itself. You know, the big picture stuff. And if you have a look at the laws of the game and how they evolved, and then look at what was happening at I was going to say the turn of the century, but before then, just as the game, you know, was in that crucible of forming the laws of the game and how should we play it. Offside was one of the key things that made football, in our opinion. In our opinion, football is football because of the offside law, because of the fluidity that the offside law gives the game. Now, if the coin had gone the other way and we don't have offside, everyone thinks, oh, it'd be great. There'll be loads of goals and, oh, it'd take away all that. But we think you lose that fluidity. You know, and our conjecture is you would finish up with 5v5 in one box and 5v5 in another.
Yeah, and a complete no non-patrolled midfield, a no man's land in the middle of the field where no one occupied it. Peter, what are your thoughts on this debate?
Well, I think it would quite clearly change the game and the way it's played massively. But you mentioned the no man's land, and the game evolves and develops in response and reaction to what is happening. So if you had this sort of 5v5 plus goalkeeper at each end, and you have this empty space, there would eventually have been a brave coach like Herbert Chapman did with the WM. He came up with a system to exploit that. Well, again, based on the offside rule, someone would have decided to exploit that space in the middle. So someone would have had to be brave, but undoubtedly it would have happened, and pulled a player probably from the forward line rather than the defensive line, pulled a player from the forward line and got them into that midfield area, so that you would essentially have a free player in there. So we could then we would have had an evolution and gone for a shape that looked something like a 5-1-4. Or maybe someone would have been even braver and gone, hold on, all these long balls, well, let's just get our goalkeeper to stand somewhere near the penalty spot. He could be an extra defender, and we could go 4-1-5, and we still have 5 up top, and so on and so forth. I don't think we'd ever have got quite to the point, though, where midfield would ever have been the most important space, because you look at how, certainly from a European perspective, they looked to dominate games by dominating the midfield. Generally numerically, you've got a midfield 2, we'll get 3 in there. You got 3 in midfield, we'll find a way to get 4 in using a false 9 or a diamond. But I don't think we'd have ever got to that point, because now if they did that and so, well, we're just going to leave 3 or 4 players standing behind you all the time. That's the thing with the offside law.
I think one of the things is it probably creates new positions, you know, because you sort of think, well, there's probably a position that evolved where you mark the keeper. You know, if you're just lumping big balls into the box because you can't be offside, there's probably someone always there marking the keeper. You know, that is a position that right now he's like, what? You know, it doesn't figure at all, does it? You know.
You find someone who's 7'2" and just get them standing next to the goalkeeper.
Right, yeah,
that's absolutely. Because the onus wouldn't be on physical fitness, would it? Because no one would be running around. They'd all be populating that box. There'd be a reduction in skill, so you wouldn't need a particularly skillful player to do that job. You just need somebody who can it'll be reverting back to the school playground in a way.
Well, they look like it looked like a rugby lineout. All the players I think that players they'd all be like 6'5", 6, 7, 8, wouldn't they? You know, and they'd just get taller and taller. I think you perhaps get some little guy. We were talking about it the other day. Perhaps get some little lads there for setting balls. Little lads for setting balls in the box.
But as Peter said, it would be subject to some massive tactical changes. So the overall thought, potted version, is that offside is essential, really, isn't it?
Absolutely.
The structure of our game. I love watching tight, tough games where teams are trying to unpick each other, and that to me is more enjoyable. I know probably from a goalkeeper's perspective, actually, Pete, but it's more enjoyable for me to observe a game than to see a 4-4 draw, because I like to see that kind of nip and tuck kind of football.
Yeah, we've talked about that a lot in terms of, I think today, especially, we hinted at it with Pelly, today's focus is all on stats and how many assists and how many goals. But as a coach, I loved good defending, and as a keeper, you loved good defending in front of you, and I think it's hugely undervalued.
Definitely. So guys, we're all in agreement that the offside law is an absolute kind of, it has to remain, and without it, we descend into footballing chaos.
Yeah, you're with us on that, Phil.
I am totally, mate, totally with you.
It could go, but you would absolutely have to be changing other rules along with it.
Yeah.
That's the thing. You've got to change other rules too. So if heading went from football, which it may well do, and you take away the offside rule, it completes a whole new set of variables. And a lot of the things we just spoke about, well, it's just going to get pumped long and we're going to have 7 foot tall players. Well, not if you can't head the thing, not if there's no heading.
Yeah.
So things change again.
Yeah.
So
mate.
you could remove the offside law, but you would have to change a heap of other things to keep the game fluid.
Definitely. We're talking alternate futures here, aren't we, guys? And that's what's so fantastic about the book. It's a wonderful high concept book. Would one of you guys like to tell everyone where it's available, where they can get their hands on this this fantastic book, moments that could have changed football forever?
Go on, Peter.
Well, if you're looking online, Amazon conquers all, as we know. You can always find whatever you're looking for book-wise on Amazon, but there's plenty of other places. Waterstones is a particular favorite. We were very proud and pleased to see the book on the shelves of Amazon of Waterstones. That was quite a good moment for us. And if you go onto the Waterstones website and pump in your postcode, it will pop up where the closest one is. So yeah, but that's a good one for us. But most places in Smith's stock it. As they say, all good bookshops and some bad ones as well.
I bet it all feels a bit more real when you see your book on the bookshelf of a bookshop.
Yeah, it did.
I've disrepute.
Yes, we had a magic moment because having worked on the National Football Museum, we went to see if it was in the National Football Museum shop, and it was.
Oh, that's amazing.
So we signed it, didn't we? We signed the copy so that whoever picked it up got a free signed copy. We were that chuffed to see it in there.
That's terrific. That's terrific. So, well, boys, it's an almost eternal spring that you're sourcing here. Footballing Hypothesis could spurn, like we said earlier, an anthology of books detailing what might have happened. What if? Guys, thank you for joining me, and join me next time on Football Geeks for more football talk. See you soon, guys.
Cheers, Phil.
Thank you.